Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Anita Au, and I am a program manager at SCAG, leading our environmental justice program and facilitating planning division equity efforts. And I will be facilitating today's session. So thank you so much for joining us on this rainy day for the Toolbox Tuesday session on baseline conditions analyses, the first of 3 sessions centered around the equity resource guide. So we hope that you are staying dry, safe, and healthy. At this time, I do encourage you to type in your name, pronouns, and organization into the chat feature. This will allow us to know who's in the room, as well as to ensure that this feature is functioning for you. So now the slide before you, you'll see a handful of meeting logistic items. This meeting is anticipated to take approximately 1.5 hours. All participant lines will be muted upon entering the room. If you have any questions during a presentation, please type it into the chat box. We will be logging all questions and answer them during the appropriate Q&A as well as open discussion sessions. If you have something that you want to ask after the presentation, please feel free to reach out to me or any of our presenters. I will have their contact information available for you. And this session is being recorded. So if you if you have to leave anytime during the session, you will be able to request for recording. It is also available on SCAG's website within the coming weeks of this session. So we at SCAG acknowledge that we are living, working, recreating, and taking space on stolen Indigenous land. SCAG's Elliott office sits on the land of the Chumash, Tongva, and Kizh people. We recognize that the tribes are still here and that we are committed to uplifting their stories, cultures, and communities. We also want to acknowledge that having a meaningful land acknowledgement is crucial to recognizing Indigenous communities appropriately and accurately. So this acknowledgement is still in the works, and we hope that we will continue to evolve this acknowledgement to be meaningful and accurate. We welcome you to explore the resources provided in the chat, which I'll be putting in right now. So you can further your awareness of the Indigenous communities. So today's session will feature presentations on 2 baseline conditions analyses from SCAG, as well as the Center for Social Innovation, followed by a fireside chat to dive deeper into the purpose of baseline condition analyses and how it can empower communities. We will then have quite a lengthy open discussion before closing out the session. So we want to have enough time to answer any questions that you may have, as well as just start the conversation to discuss the benefits and or just lessons learned on baseline conditions analysis. So Jennifer, can we go on to the next deck, please? Thank you. Great. So I'd like to kick off the session with SCAG's baseline conditions analysis, then dive into Dr. Ramakrishnan's amazing work at the Center for Social Innovation. As I mentioned at the beginning of the session, my name is Anita Au. I am a program manager at SCAG, and I lead our environmental justice program, as well as facilitate planning division equity efforts. And I will start off this segment with a quick background on SCAG's equity efforts. So in July of 2020, SCAG's Regional Council adopted a resolution affirming its commitment to advancing justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion throughout Southern California. The resolution called for a formation of an ad hoc special committee on equity and social justice, which helped inform the development of key elements like a working racial equity definition and a racial equity early action plan. And you can learn more about both key deliverables in the link that I provided in the chat right here. But in order to develop these key elements, SCAG needed to better understand the existing disparities and inequities of the region, thus developing a racial equity baseline conditions report. The equity indicators, which you'll hear more about in the coming slides, align with SCAG's Regional Transportation Plan and Sustainable Community Strategy, or Connect SoCal, and helped inform the Racial Equity Early Action Plan, which is a guide for SCAG to further advance equity within the region, and includes quite a few action items for SCAG. So the baseline conditions analysis helps us better understand barriers, measure impact, track change, and support better outcomes for our communities. There are 4 crucial steps in developing a baseline conditions analysis, but above it all, we needed to center our community. In SCAG's case, it was the entire SCAG region, 6 counties, 191 cities, and 19 million residents. But in the next presentation, the focus on Dr. Ramakrishnan's work focuses on a smaller demographic, the Inland Empire, which actually yields different results, different and similar results, but it's just going to show you the 2 different levels of or 2 different types of baseline conditions analyses that that are really interesting and also very fruitful. So SCAG actually hosted its first equity-focused Toolbox Tuesday in June of 2021 and provided a step-by-step tutorial of how a local jurisdiction can and should develop their own baseline conditions analysis. And if you did not attend that session or you need a refresher, I'd highly recommend you to take a look at the recording. For this session, we are not going to do the step-by-step presentation, but we will focus more on existing efforts and best practices. So this is kind of like a next, what's next to this, the session that we had in June of 2021. So as I mentioned previously, the community needs to be meaningfully involved with the development process, something that will be shared in future presentations and something that will be deeply discussed in this session. For SCAG, we covered such a large region, so our considerations are more regional, but you'll still find very interesting analyses from our findings. So one of the very first questions you need to ask when developing a baseline conditions analysis is, what does an equitable community mean to you? So for SCAG, we developed a definition which was to eliminate bias and barriers that have historically and systemically marginalized communities of color to ensure all people can be healthy, prosperous, and participate fully in civic life. That is our vision, which is like towards that top of the tree. But we also need to look at how we get there. And that's where this baseline conditions report comes in, along with having a roadmap to how we actually get there, as well as programs and funding to help implement. So we will be focusing on this baseline conditions analysis for this session. But what do we actually look at and what do we measure? So when we first developed our first baseline conditions analysis back in March of 2021, we completed a comprehensive review of inequity baselines and equity indices developed throughout California and across the nation, and developed a set of criteria for data that's being used for our analyses. So we wanted to make sure that the data and the topics aligned with SCAG's work, that it was available consistently over time to produce a trend, that it was produced by a trusted source, that it was regularly used by multiple public agencies, so it has some kind of merit to it, that it's disaggregated or broken down by geography, race, and ethnicity, and that it would be available for the 7 different disadvantage factors, which we have yet to completely encompass in our analysis, but this is the goal for us. So when we're analyzing the data, what is the data actually telling us? So I wanted to share a few comparisons between the 2 baseline conditions report that SCAG has produced, and then we'll go from there. So for this slide here, based on the data from 2018 to 2020, for broadband access, it has gone up, which means that we are slowly reducing the digital divide. However, when you actually look closely at it, 1 in 10 families without internet access is still one too many. If you think about how much we all actually rely on our phones and computers to work, play, eat, and just do so many other things, that it's not having this access is really detrimental to everyday life. We also saw a very interesting development from our bike and pedestrian collisions indicator. So from 2018 to 2020, the percentage of Hispanic Latino residents living in high-risk pedestrian and bicycle involved collision areas decreased by 10%. But the percentage of white residents living in high-risk collision areas almost doubled. So on face value, it's still not a disproportionate impact for white communities because they occupy 32% of the regional population, and only 24% of residents are within these high-risk areas. But it is interesting to look at the comparison because they did have a 10%, almost a double increase between these 2 years. And similarly for Hispanic Latino residents, they do have a disproportionate impact still, even though they decreased by about 10%, they are still overwhelmingly residing in these high-risk collision areas. So lastly, we added this extreme heat and tree canopy as a new indicator per SCAG's commitment to climate adaptation, and findings were also quite eye-opening. So findings show that counties with the largest proportions of peoples of color, like Imperial and San Bernardino counties, are projected to have more extreme heat days, whereas counties with the smallest proportions of peoples of color, like Orange County and Ventura, are projected to have less extreme heat days. And when we're considering tree canopy coverage, on average, census tracts with majority people of color or almost 2.5 times less likely to have tree canopy coverage compared to census tracts with majority non-Hispanic white residents. So that is definitely food for thought, and maybe something that can be brought to different groups to campaign for different policies. So I kind of touched upon this, but what actually do we do with this information that we have? We have to communicate and disseminate. So SCAG and other agencies use various platforms to share such information. So you can release reports like what SCAG has done with our racial equity baseline conditions reports, or you can develop mapping applications like the California Public Healthy Places Index. You can develop ArcGIS story maps, which help illustrate stories in a virtual platform. You can develop equity dashboards like the National Equity Atlas, which combines report writing, mapping, and data, and also create fact sheets that are easily distributed to many folks. But it is more than just talk. We really need to act. We need to affirm, we need to counter, we need to transform. So I've talked a lot about SCAG's racial equity baseline conditions report, but haven't really provided like an overview of this newly released one that was actually just released last week. So the report, which I will put the link in the chat so you can easily access it, was just released last week, and I'm going to go over a few touch points on this report. So again, it was first released in March of 2021, and now we have our second report that just released last week. We do hope that this report and future iterations help motivate more equitable decision-making in the future. And we update the data as well as the indicators and added this new component in this iteration, which are the county narratives. So when looking back at the different indicators, we wanted to keep using Connect SoCal's key themes, as well as the comprehensive selection criteria that was used previously to ensure data reflected accurately for the purpose of the baseline conditions report. And I'm not going to go through them again because I already did, and it's a mouthful. So now a total of 24 equity indicators are presented among 5 categories: demographics, economy, communities, mobility, and environment. So some indicators were added, like national origin, educational attainment, compact commuting, and extreme heat and tree canopy, while others have slight changes in their methodologies or their names, like limited English proficiency, our broadband access, bike and pedestrian collisions. And these changes are notated in the red stars, while the new indicators are shown with the blue stars. And we also removed some indicators that SCAG had no real jurisdiction over, or were slightly repetitive of other indicators. And that would be the strike-through indicators in that list above. So lastly, we did add county narratives, which provides a snapshot of existing conditions with a subset of equity indicators to measure opportunity, economic vitality, access, housing affordability and quality, transportation safety, environmental health, and climate vulnerability. So these will are towards the end of the report, and look at them individually for each county. And with that, I end my very quick presentation. Happy to answer a few questions before we move on to our next presentations. So I think I'm seeing something in the chat right now. Martha, the UCLA heat risk map correlates how
heat waves stagnate air pollution and the ozone, so that this causes the excess deaths and hospitalizations more so than just heat by itself. Because because as you know, if you have heat and you have I don't know, tree canopy, and you have access to a lot of the AC amenities, you're going to be probably fine during the heat wave. But if you're in a low-income community with health disparities, pollution burden, et cetera, then that heat actually stagnates the air pollution and the ozone layers, so that those people are the ones that end up in. So I guess I'm just pointing that out, because for us in Los Angeles, we're trying to direct our investments, not necessarily where it's just the hottest for public health outcomes, but where we have those other pre-existing health disparities. So the heat map is really great, but it needs to be, for us, interconnected with those other disparities to then convey the what we can do and mitigate about that.
Yeah, thank you so much, Martha, for bringing that up. I think you're absolutely right. it's just a start, like having this this risk map, having this data helps us develop more appropriate policies or projects that can help the most impacted communities, not just the hottest, but then
Yeah.
the other impacts that come from heat and extreme heat. So thank you so much for bringing
Yeah, and thank you for bringing this to us. I really appreciate it.
Yes. Thank you. Yes. All right. Are there any other questions? Because we also have a open discussion towards the end of the session. So if you think of anything else, please put that in the chat, or feel free to start that open discussion later on. But right now, I do want to introduce Dr. Karthik Ramakrishnan from the Center for Social Innovation to briefly introduce himself as well as his team before he starts his presentation.
Excellent. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Anita, and the SCAG team, and just for this wonderful community. I'm just going to ask CSI team members if they're able to turn on their cameras so I can briefly introduce all of the folks that support the amazing work that we do. So we have Gary Redberg. If you just want to say hi, Gary. Gary's our research manager. Erin Conless just joined us a couple of weeks ago. She's our data scientist and senior research manager. We also have Fatima Nelson, who's our community engagement specialist, who is in addition to Sarah Wright and Eric Calderon, is so vital to the work we do engaging with community. And then Monica Cardenas, who joined our team, I think a little over a month ago, who supports all this work. So I know that, there's a lot of labor and love that goes into the work that we do. So I just wanted to introduce some of the team members that are behind this work. I think Beth Tamiose, I saw her earlier as well. And one of the pieces that we worked on was for SCAG, which was the Ready to Rise framework, which I'll mention a little bit later. So feel free to DM any of them or email them afterwards if you have any thoughts or questions on what I'm going to be presenting today. Thank you, team. Okay, so I'm going to say a little bit about CSI, and then this baseline indicators report related to the Cielo Fund that caught the attention of some folks at SCAG, and to give a little bit of background context for that, and then to talk about this new effort underway called IE 2030, and would love to get your thoughts and input on how we can learn from other similar efforts and how we can build, including maybe build together, if any of you is interested in getting engaged and involved. So in terms of CSI, we are not a TV CBS series focusing on the Inland Empire. The CSI is the Center for Social Innovation, and there's so many different ways that we could be described. We are a university-based center, but we see ourselves as a catalyst for systems transformation and upholding core values. More and more in the work that we do, both as an organization and collectively, we realize that getting alignment on core values is important with any kind of collective and collaborative work. In general, we're trying to more fully realize the region's potential, meaning the Inland Empire's region's potential in terms of civic activities, philanthropic investments, and the strength of its nonprofit sector. We do a lot of work outside the Inland Empire as well. I am the equity advisor for SCAG, and I'm supported in that work by Beth Tamiose. We also do statewide work. We also do national work, especially as it relates to Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander communities. In terms of our reputation, data is so important to what we do, but it goes beyond that. So our reputation is built on the key pillars of data and social science research, but also having strategic policy awareness, approaching our work and encouraging others to approach work with innovation mindsets, and to do so with deep community partnerships. It's not to say that we score 100% on all of these all the time, but these are the things that we strive for. And we are called the Center for Social Innovation very intentionally. And we are about 4.5 years old now. And it's to try to shift that narrative. When you ask people to drop pins on a map in terms of where's innovation happening in California, chances are they'll drop pins up and down the coast from the Bay Area down to LA, to Orange County, to San Diego County with biotech down there. Very rarely will people think of innovation and innovation-related adjectives and nouns to describe what's going on in inland California. But we know through our work and the work of so many others that innovation actually happens everywhere in California. It's just not resourced properly. And we're starting to see in our region and in the San Joaquin Valley what happens when you start resourcing innovation in a more significant way. We're still a long ways off, but we're proud to be part of a group of institutions that are doing this work. Some of you may have seen this as our operating framework. Data and research insights are, of course, critical to the work that we do in partnership with stakeholders, but it's not just data, right? The way we say it, you need data in order to be credible, but you need to have narrative in order to be memorable and meaningful. And finally, it all needs to be wrapped up in a call for strategic action. This is the kind of group that I think we have here in abundance, where people are not only doing data and research for its own sake, but are thinking about the kind of impact we want to have and making sure that community voices and community narratives are meaningfully incorporated, if not empowered, in the process. We have a bunch of reports that you can find on our website, socialinnovation.ucr.edu. A bunch of them relate to the State of the Inland Empire series that we did for a few years. And increasingly, we're doing other types of opportunistic research when we find the opportunity to partner with key community anchors that are pushing a certain set of issues. We also do some light advocacy, largely advocacy in terms of getting more investments into our region. And you can look at our state of nonprofits in the Inland Empire, as well as work that we did with the governor's office and Friedman Consulting, showing the massive gap between coastal California and inland California, not only in terms of the size of the nonprofit sector, but also foundation investments that perpetuate this kind of regional disparity. We also have several frameworks for action. One of them I'll mention, especially given the SCAG audience, is the Ready to Rise framework. This is our answer to the shovel ready framework that is often used to prioritize infrastructure projects. Now, there is this notion of shovel worthy, and in the Q&A, I'm happy to talk about why shovel worthy is problematic in ways that people might not intend, and why we need to have a different kind of framework in terms of thinking about community readiness. And also being explicit about core values like resilience, inclusion, sustainability, and equity. I'll ask someone from our team to drop the link in the chat. If you go to the School of Public Policy's working paper series, or if you just go to our website, socialinnovation.ucr.edu, scroll down to frameworks for action, and you'll see the link to the working paper that Beth Temiose and I worked on for SCAG as part of our inclusive economic series last year. So baseline indicators, the one baseline indicators report that caught the eye of our colleagues at SCAG was for the Cielo Fund. The Cielo Fund is a fund that has recently been established with the Inland Empire Community Foundation. It's one of several funds to mark the 80th anniversary of IECF. And Jesse Melgar, who is the director of the fund, and a good dear colleague and friend, reached out and said, hey, you have credibility when it comes to doing research that is strategic for the region. Is this something that we can partner on together? And we said, of course, we would love to be helpful. And the major peg was this fact that was evident in the 2020 census, that our region has now become a Latino majority region. So the idea was to produce a set of indicators that could then inspire action based on that narrative peg, if you will, right? You have a majority Latino region. How is the population doing? And how can a fund that is being built to serve that population have impact. So one of the set of indicators that we pointed out was not only that 52% share of Latinos have in the region, but also what it looks like in terms of other counties in Southern California, right? So this is one of the things that, many of us would love, we look at spreadsheets, we run sophisticated statistical analyses, sometimes just good old descriptive data that is laid out in a simple graphical format can be so insightful, right? So you have, Imperial County is the only county that has a higher Latino share of the population, and tends to be a relatively small county population-wise. So if you're talking about large counties in California, San Bernardino and Riverside County actually have an even greater share of Latinos than Los Angeles County and Ventura County. It's a fast-growing population, and so not only are Latinos a majority here, they're an important part of the population growth in San Bernardino County and Riverside County, growing much faster than the population average for these two counties. We also have data in terms of the places where these populations are important. And, sometimes it's not always a chart, right? If we had a chart of all of the cities and what the numbers were, people might get lost in the data. Sometimes these very simple circles that are proportional to the size of the population can be persuasive. This is part of the work that we did for SCAG last year as well, in terms of the economic briefing book, is to talk about the power of data visualization in terms of communicating the importance of data points for planning and advocacy purposes. Now, it's not just population growth that matters. Disparities also matter. Now, one of the key points that we uncovered in doing this work is something that has driven a lot of deep soul searching in our region and strategic conversations. So we've known for a long time that about 20% of residents in the Inland Empire have a bachelor's degree or higher. And that's actually gone up a little bit, over the last 5 years. We've looked at racial disparity data all the time. It was only through this opportunity where we focused on the Latino population in the region that we found this eye-popping statistic of only 11% of Latinos have a bachelor's degree or higher. This is not to say that everyone should get a bachelor's degree, but when you have a region where 29% of white residents, about more than 30% of Asian residents have a bachelor's degree or higher, but only 11% of Latinos, the majority of the population and a supermajority of the young adult population has a bachelor's degree or higher. That is a problem. And that is something the region needs to focus on and take some very dramatic course correction to improve that. And we're really heartened by the seriousness with which various stakeholders have latched onto that data point and tried to figure out how we can improve this. There are other indicators that are also pretty stark, right? If you look at median household income per capita, Latinos in the Inland Empire have about half of the median per capita income of white residents. And that's a problem that we need to look at. Similarly, in terms of poverty, much higher rates of poverty for Latinos in the region versus whites. And child poverty, right? To the extent that child poverty has tremendous effects over the life cycle. And we know this from decades of research. We are not setting the Latino population and by extension, the overall population of the Inland Empire for success, given the high rates of childhood poverty among Latinos in the region. Finally, in terms of home ownership, it's a little bit of a mixed bag. Yes, homeownership is higher in Riverside County and San Bernardino County for Latinos than LA County, but the homeownership rate has actually declined among Latinos in the region. And so that's something that it's important to pay attention to. It's declined, for the white population as well, but it's relatively high, right, in terms of the proportion that are renting among Latinos compared to whites, and that's some of what we uncovered through our data, and we're really grateful for the Cielo Fund, including all of the advisory board members who have helped elevate those community narratives when it comes to news stories that come out of that report. Next, I want to talk about some forward-facing work to share some this as we're building it, and would love your input and potentially involvement as we do this work. So this is IE 2030, which is a vision and roadmap process for the region. What we're trying to do in collaboration with at least a dozen, I want to say we've had two design committee meetings. I want to say maybe almost 20 sectoral leaders from various organizations in the region. What we're trying to do is to create a roadmap of goals to achieve in the 5, 10 years and beyond, to try to create a package of strategic and synergistic investments, policies, and practices that can be used to coordinate our work and asks with investors, partners, and champions, and also to engage in a process of systems transformation to better anticipate and build resilient, inclusive, sustainable, and equitable communities. In terms of inspiration, we draw on inspiration from the California 100 initiative. I am the director of that. This is a massive statewide effort run through the University of California and Stanford University. A lot of talent coming from the Goldman School of Public Policy and elsewhere in the UC system, as well as other research centers, even outside of academia.
Keep an eye on his house.
Oh, yeah?
His wife is gonna give birth tomorrow to a little baby boy.
Okay, I will continue. So this effort, you can check out at california100.org. I'll just say a little bit about California 100. It is an effort focused on long-term futures. And our vision is to create a California that is innovative, sustainable, and equitable for all. In the interest of time, I'm not going to read too much on that slide. We are anchored in core values, and you see RISE showing up here, but we also have innovation as a core value in the work. We are an aspirational initiative, so this spells iRISE, and it can be seen as a little bit cheesy, but sometimes cheesiness is good. It's good to, sometimes team members don't always remember what our core values are. And this is just a good mnemonic to remember that as well. But then to also not just use it for symbolic value, right? To get concrete about it. 15 issue areas, right? They say don't boil the ocean. We definitely don't want to boil the ocean because we are concerned about climate change, but we will take on multiple issues and together. Part of what's exciting is to not only look at something like the future of work, which there was a commission on that. This is a commission on the future of everything, not just in isolation, but also to look at the interdependencies between many of these issue areas. What California 100 is in the process of doing with our with young leaders throughout the state and ultimately with our intergenerational commission is to build a vision and roadmap that has 4 components. With our young people, for now, we're calling it a youth manifesto for the future of California. No matter what it's called, I mean, these are the essential components. One is to build that vision. It was so great to hear Anita talk about visioning and how important that is, including vision as it relates to equity. So what does our ideal California or our ideal community look like for people, for places, and for the environment, and anchored in our core values? That is really important. Next is going from vision to solutions. Anita, I love that tree and roots. We use the analogy of a summit, a mountain summit, right? So part of the vision is to be able to see the summit clearly. We don't always get to see that, especially in Southern California, depending on what air quality looks like, or in a day like this when it's cloudy and raining. But what does it look like to be able to clearly see the summit, to jointly agree if you have several summits that that particular summit is the one that we're trying to get to? And then everything is about building roadmaps, right, to get to that summit. And so those include solutions. What are the solutions that are necessary to get everyone to the summit together at the same time, regardless of their ability or station in life? That's where policies, practices, and resources come in. Then we shift to strategies. How do we enact those solutions? What are the barriers that stand in the way, and how do we remove those barriers? And then finally, we can come up with strategy all day, every day. But if we don't have commitments, individual commitments and institutionalized commitments, they're really not going to go anywhere. So these are the key components that we are building in California 100. So that's one set of inspirations. and that drive what we're doing in our region. There is a backstory about how IE Rise was actually a precursor to California 100. Happy to talk about that in the fireside chat or in the Q&A more generally. Another inspiration comes from Fresno. Many of you may know about Fresno Drive, which is an ambitious 10-year effort to build a set of coordinated investments to transform the Fresno region. We learned about Fresno Drive as I was doing some early collaborative work with Ashley Swearingen for Inland California Rising, and it's amazing how they built that particular roadmap together and the kind of successes they've had, including most recently being the only site in California that won a Build Back Better Regional Challenge Award from the Biden administration. And it was the largest ever in the country. It was a $62.5 million award related to food innovation. So those are the inspiring examples that we are taking to the work of IE 2030. Instead of 15 issue areas, we have 12. So I guess we're being a little bit more modest than what California 100 is trying to do. And similarly to what California 100 is doing, the CSI team, as well as our partners and collaborators, are interested in the intersectionality across issues and in making sure that we operationalize and advance core values that I had mentioned before. In terms of the frameworks that we're looking at that can be helpful in this work, one is the capital absorption framework that many of you are probably familiar with, right? In terms of what we're trying to do is to figure out what our shared priorities are, figure out what the kind of investable pipeline looks like, and then what is the kind of enabling environment that can make it happen. Another framework that we are incorporating into this work of vision and roadmap is a modified version of the FSG model of the Waters of Systems Change model. What our community organizations did with IE Rise, and this was about 3 years ago before California 100, was to flip the model to recognize the importance of mental models or mindsets as barriers to systems transformation or as enablers for system transformation, but also to have those other components, right? The importance of social capital and relationships, the importance of understanding power dynamics, both as barriers or as enablers and accelerants for systems transformation. And then the kind of policies, practices, and resources that are necessary to make these transformations stick. What our community partners also flagged was the importance of community voice and the need to activate shared values. And that's where a lot of our inspiration and the focus on shared values comes in. And you'll see how we take pieces of what's in this model that California 100 has taken for its work, and we're hoping to do in the IE as well, not with a 100-year time horizon, but with a 10-year time horizon. As we do this work, we found some amazing partners, a lot of them working in the social determinants of health and community health sphere. And this is a framework that's been incubated from Rethink Health. That's very appealing, right? So it's to take a whole bunch of indicators that we can get from the American Community Survey, from health data, and other types of data that SCAG and others have access to, and to put it in frameworks that actually depolarize, right? So we talk about meaningful work and wealth. We talk about a thriving natural world. We talk about belonging and civic muscle. We talk about lifelong learning. These concepts have been workshopped and refined over years to make sure that they are not alienating language that a broad set of folks can get behind. Our timeline is working with our design committee to produce briefing books that will be released in December of this year. And then we will go through iterative rounds of visioning and roadmap work. So the first round of design exercises will be in January, where we will focus on vision. Then we will focus on the first element of strategy, which is the solutions, and then on strategies to overcome barriers, identify feasibility of our work over different year targets. And then finally to produce a vision and roadmap document in June of 2023, and then to take it on the road and make sure that as many of the stakeholders that were part of this, as well as others, will be part of that commitment and, importantly, accountability work, right? And to use it as a template for collaboration, as well as the template for attracting investments. Part of that, and this is why it's, we're here to talk about baseline indicators here. Baseline indicators are in some ways where we start. We are producing briefing books. And remember what we talked about, data, narrative, and action. There's not a ton of narrative that we have here. That'll come through in the visioning exercises. But the data that we produce, we are producing it in a way that it's as easily accessible as possible. The way we frame this up is what we're doing is trying to democratize the work of planning. So it's not just about inclusive planning. It is to democratize the work. There are so many specialists that are involved in the work of planning, from government agency officials to researchers to developers. It is very rare for community organizations or communities, especially those in frontline communities, to have the tools and resources that they need to be able to participate on what can approximate an even playing field of expertise when it comes to informing decisions. So that is what we're trying to do here. So the briefing books that we're trying to do at a very basic level tries to bring as many people up to speed in terms of what they need to know about a particular topic area. And we do that as a summary at the front, 10 things you need to know about housing. And some of those relate to key indicators, some of those relate to key institutions and interventions and planning processes that can be helpful. So our goal is to provide a high-level summary so that all participants can have a basic understanding of various issues. It differs from a traditional briefing book in which we're not producing any kind of original research, nor are we making recommendations. The recommendations will come through this iterative process. In terms of our outline, we have our intro, talk about the relevance of the topic, 10 things you need to know, quick statistics that are eye-popping, that allow people to quote unquote get it in terms of what the problem is. And then to go a little bit of history. Every single briefing book that we do at CSI talks about the contributions of Native peoples in that issue area, talk about the Spanish colonial period, accelerate to the present day, and to center as much as possible in racial equity in the explanation of that history. Then we'll be talking about key policy developments, talk about COVID. Then we lay out the key players by sector and by role, key projects and initiatives, and then we provide a list of references and appendix material. Chances are most people who are busy or people who don't have the appetite to get into any of the gory details will read the first 3 or 4 pages. And so that's critical for us to get that right. So I'm going to pause there with 2 questions that we would love to tee up for you all. One, are there other prior examples that we can learn from and build from, either in other places or regions that are doing this kind of democratized planning work across issue areas, ideally, maybe not across issue areas, and maybe in particular issues like housing? What kind of tools have people used? What kind of frames have people used? What kind of visioning and planning processes have people used to do this work effectively? And then are there any recommendations you would offer in terms of either the frameworks and indicators that we have or other frameworks and indicators that you've found helpful, or in terms of visioning exercises and roadmap processes that you think will be useful to build an action-oriented document that can transform this region in the decade to come? So thank you very much for your time. And Anita, back to you.
Thank you so much, Karthik, for your presentation. I think that was fantastic. This session was focused on baseline conditions analysis and providing like the data that's needed for more equitable decision making and to develop plans and policies and projects and just anything that will help vulnerable populations, vulnerable communities. So the work that you're doing with the various different groups that you've talked about, I think it's great that it's all happening in the Inland Empire. And I think when you're asking for examples from other areas, I think it's a really, really good point to bring here at to a SCAG hosted event, mostly because SCAG does encompass half of California, the southern half of California, minus San Diego, but it's a platform for us to discuss. Are there other areas that are doing similar work, and what can we learn from them? What are you learning from us right now through these presentations? I think we just started our fireside chat, huh?
Yes, we did. Yeah, and by the way, as we're talking, I'll just say a little bit more, and then let's open it up, Anita. But I think, I mean, I'll say, and some of my team members will chuckle, especially Beth. I'm going to not call you out. I'm going to call you in as I say this. Beth Tamiose is, urban planning, PhD from UCLA. I'm a political scientist, and what I did my dissertation work was on public opinion, actually more political behavior research. Happy election day, everyone. If you haven't voted already, if you're able to vote, please remember to vote. That was my dissertation, and civic engagement more broadly, and then public opinion added that. Then I started drifting into public policy. My first job out of grad school was working at the Public Policy Institute of California. So I started getting engaged in more conceptually messy work, but really important pragmatic work. And I remember when we started our center, Beth was like, it sounds like you're kind of like an urban planning kind of outfit. And I was like, yeah, but I'm not an urban planner. And she was like, oh, you just don't know it yet. And I think, yeah, so here we are, right? 4 years later, or 4.5 years later, and we're like in the thick of this work. But at the same time, I think, even though we don't have certificates in urban planning or degrees in urban planning, like over time, like this has been the work. I still feel like we have, and I'll just say I have so much to learn, but I'm also amazed at the times when we show some of these things, people are like, wow, that's really cool. Because I guess we're not necessarily constrained by some of the disciplinary boundaries that others might have. So we get to do things in ways that people might have analogies for, but might not be exact. I had the opportunity to present some of this recently at I think it's called the California Planning Roundtable. It's connected with the California chapter of the APA. There was someone there from Livermore, and made a comment. I'll say one thing that prompted this comment, and I found inspiring, and I'm going to reconnect with this person and see what we can do together. When we started off our Center for Social Innovation, we wanted to look at what other places in California are on this journey. Often it's tempting people in the Inland Empire look west to LA and be like, hey, what has LA done, and can we replicate that? But it's not an asset-based narrative, and it's always like, oh, the IE is behind. We're trying to catch up to LA. We're trying to catch up to Orange County. What we did was we actually invited Ashley Swearingen from Fresno, another one of those like underdog regions, right? People count out, right? Or they think, wow, it's like, what is the last amazing thing you heard coming out of Fresno, right? But there are amazing things in Fresno, including Bitwise Industries, by the way, right? And so that was important for us to learn from others that are on a similar journey. Let's say about why this Livermore thing was important. Mental models, right? I recently, just last week, I presented the California Economic Summit and talked about the importance of mental models, and got like this really, I mean, people literally clapped after what I said. I'm not going to recreate what I said, but I'll give you a little bit of like a sketch of what I said, of how important mental models are. So for the longest time, for about 2 decades, you had a regional economist from the Inland Empire who characterized the Inland Empire as the land of cheap dirt. Now let that sink in for a while, and what the implications are. Now that was used to explain why we had so much housing construction in this region, and then subsequently massive expansion of warehouse activity. But think how much you devalue a place when you call it a land of cheap dirt. Think about how you pay no mind to the value of that dirt, especially if there was agriculture in that region, or the value of open space and what that means for quality of life, as well as a whole bunch of community health and well-being outcomes, but also reflect on the fact that there is no mention of the human capital that we have in this region, that all you see is cheap dirt. And then think through the kinds of economic development decisions that people in county government, city government, so many other agencies do with that as their mental model. It just shapes everything, right? At the level of decision making. And then think about how that filters down into the school, down to someone in 3rd or 4th grade, and they think about what their future is going to be, and think about how devastating it is, right, in terms of limiting their potential. I guess I will go into this a little bit, Anita, if you just give me another minute. Now, most of your camera is off, right? Close your eyes and try to imagine a different possibility. So imagine if I told you that there's a 30-mile radius region in this country that has a world-class public research university, 2 other public universities that graduate thousands of people, including with STEM degrees. You have 5 of the most elite private colleges in the country. You have a score of other private higher ed institutions and community colleges, all within a 30-mile radius. And then open your eyes, and do you think that warehousing would be the dominant land use and economic development use in that region? Chances are that you probably wouldn't, right? By the way, that's the thing that like got all the applause, and people are like, wow. As I mentioned this, as I was part of this panel, at the end, the former city manager of Livermore, I think he did it for like 20 years or something. He said, you know, it really hit me when you talked about that land of cheap dirt, because that used to be what people said about Livermore. And I was like, wow, that's crazy. Like, don't you have a national lab there? He said, no, we have 2 national labs there. But people were like focusing on Silicon Valley and Berkeley, and not, instead of having an asset-based narrative of what that place represented and how you could build from that amazing assets in that region. It was a deficit-based narrative, and thinking about this as the land of cheap dirt. So that's something that I'm hoping, you know, as we listen and learn from others, is how do we, there's data galore, but how do we package that data in a way that with that triangle, you know, that FSG triangle, can inform systems transformation? And that's the work we're hoping to do. Sorry for that extended thing. I think we can open it up to Q&A, but that's, you know, that's the work, and that's the thing that we hope can be inspiring to others, but really would love to learn as much as possible. We still feel, you know, like relative newbies, but maybe we're all newbies. We're all just trying to figure this out.
I absolutely agree with you in that we have so much to learn. It's never ending. And I'm so glad that you brought it back to the listening and learning part of our session, because I mean, it's also very cheesy to say knowledge is power, and it really is, because it opens doors, it expands understanding, and it just does so much, especially when you put it in a narrative that makes sense to people, that touch people, that make them relate. So I absolutely agree with everything you said. And I think that is the point of our fireside chat, to get to know the speakers, to understand our background as well as our passions and our inspirations. And hopefully that would also help others in your work, in your understanding, to even just to relate to us, to know that we're all in this together. Equity is hard. Equity is not an easy task. It's brand new. It's just, it feels good to have a community to just talk to each other, to brainstorm, to share best practices, to share examples, to share failures, to share successes. It's just, I think this is such a great platform, and thank you so much, Karthik, for opening that up for us.
Great, thank you. And it saw some comments in the chat, so thank you so much, Martha. And yes, we certainly, and you know, both friends with and know Juan's important work and the work of so many community orgs too. I guess one thing I'll say in terms of mindsets that's really important, and I have different opportunities to try to play around with ideas and frameworks. So I've been asked to be part of this one design committee by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation for its big convening that they're having in St. Louis. And one of the words that, and I'm part of this narrative work group as part of that. So people talk about lived experience, right? It's not just academic knowledge, but lived experience that matters. And I'm like trying to play around and tweak with it to talk about lived expertise. Because a lot of times when people say lived experience, they still don't think of that as expertise, right? And so we try to do that as a center as much as we can, is to lift up the expertise that is resident in community, but not to say that it's equivalent, right? Yeah, I mean, we have our training, we have our methods for a reason, but we each have our place and role when it comes to bringing expertise to the table. One other example I'll say that's been so inspiring that I've talked to different folks and whoever will listen, there's this effort called Just San Bernardino that came up with a city-based economic development plan that they call the People's Plan. Check it out, justsb.org, I think, and not .com. Part of that, they came up with what they call the People's Dictionary. And it was like all of the terminology that we specialists, acronyms to laws and all these things that we use, they created a People's Dictionary to try to translate, to someone, regardless of their educational attainment, to understand in plain English and in Spanish, what these concepts are. And that's something I would encourage you all as you're thinking about, baseline conditions, baseline indicators, to think about a People's Dictionary. And that's another innovation. I mean, this may be there in other parts of the country, but that People's Dictionary thing is so inspiring to me, and hopefully to you as well.
Wow, that's really interesting, and I'll definitely be looking that up. I see, Martha, you actually turned on your screen. Did you want to follow up on some of your comments in the chat?
Really, just to say that the combination of your talents and skills, combining how to convey, depolarize, very complex concepts is just super inspiring. I just wanted to tell you that. I'm at a loss for words, really. I've never seen a presentation quite like yours, and I'm very grateful to Anita and all of SCAG for bringing you to us. And I am from LA, and I think you're absolutely right. We need to listen to the wisdom of the communities themselves and create that community, uplift that community expertise. And that's what we're trying to do through my office at the Climate Emergency Mobilization Office and the Climate Equity LA series. So would love to cross paths with you again and the folks at SCAG for sure, to see how we can improve and add value to what we're doing without reinventing the wheel. Because I really see that your work is thinking what I'm thinking. How do we change hearts and minds to shift the paradigm? Not just focus on the data, absolutely shift hearts and minds. And we're doing that slowly, in city government, and we need to do it much faster. So thank you so very much.
Thank you, Martha. And hearts and minds, I use those, and I would encourage us to just pause and kind of meditate on that. And that is so important and so powerful, right? In fact, I think when I in that session on Saturday, when I presented at the end, our host said, "Thank you so much for, opening our minds." I was like, "Yeah, but the heart is important too," right? And when you're talking about commitment, right, especially when there are all these challenges, both human caused and greater than that as well, that we make sure that we are attuned to that. So thank you so much. What I'll say on the depolarizing language, that comes from Rethink Health in terms of their vital conditions. And I spoke with Dora Barilla, who is one of the partners in our work for I-2030, who had given me a bit more background, right, in terms of we play around with concept and indicators all the time. largely with a view to inspire or provoke or just be sticky in people's minds. Part of my background, so I wrote a book called Framing Immigrants, along with a couple of other colleagues at UCR, including a former grad student from here. In doing that work, it's almost like you learn so much about framing and narrative that I started, practicing the tools in the work that we do, and never look back. And it's but it's important, right? So, and also narrative. So there's so many different ways of thinking about narrative, but narrative is how we make sense of the world, right? And that's the whole thing, like cheap dirt versus human assets, human capital, right? Human talent. So many examples we can give. One example I give is something like when you look at the disproportionate ways that Black and brown men are pushed out of the high school system, right? One of the mental models that a lot of educational systems still hold on to is thinking of education as something you deliver in a distraction-free environment. Well, if you think that the only way that you can educate someone is in a distraction-free environment, that means that anyone who is a distraction in the classroom is a threat to that and needs to be removed from that environment, right? So there's just so many powerful ways that mental models, mindsets, and also consciousness relatedly. I think of all of this as narrative, right? You can think of narrative that are just broad and also very specific. So thank you so much, Martha.
Thank you. And I think we kind of opened up our Q&A session as well, or our open discussion session as well. So does anyone have any questions, comments from this presentation, from any of the presentations today, or something you just want to share? Don't all talk at once. Well, I do have a question for you, Karthik. So when we were developing SCAG's baseline conditions report and looking at the different indicators, we had that the selection criteria, the strategies for picking our indicators. What did you do on your end to look to see what was the most important to provide in your report?
Yeah, thank you for that, Anita. And we were hoping that Jesse Malgar could be here today, but he can't. This was really important because we had all, like, data is really important, and for a lot of communities and regions, there is insufficient data to be able to make the case. So I want to recognize that. There's also the other problem in which we're swimming in an ocean of data. And so if there's so many different ways that you could present data related to education, data related to home ownership, data related to income, poverty, et cetera. It took a lot of iterative work to be able to produce those like dead simple looking indicators. And part of that is, remember the thing that I had on my slide in terms of, I think it was like strategic policy awareness, right? So, and this is where Jesse Malgar and also the board of Cielo is very important, in which he was thinking ahead in terms of what are news stories that could come out of this? What are decisions in terms of the fund and what it invests in that could be informed by this? What are ways that we can make sure that decision makers will pay attention? And that ended up being helpful in terms of how you present the data. And then we had some design choices to figure out, right? How much we could have produced trend lines. Sometimes trend lines can be meaningful and powerful, but it's always like, what is the strategy behind it, right? Why are you presenting the data in this way? Who is your audience? Who are you trying to influence? Hearts and minds or money? Like what are you trying to do, or shifting policies? It's not always possible to do that, and especially if you're thinking about multiple audiences in mind. But that was, this wasn't like a kind of grassroots engagement type of process. This was it relied on trusting the process in which you had these leaders who are part of the board of Cielo Fund, as well as Jesse Malgar, who've done a lot of work in community and with community partners and to rely on that expertise as we went back and forth. We went through many iterations of this report. It was actually much, much more complicated with like a slew of data tables. And we realized, well, I'll say some of our team members did that, and I came in and I was like, what is this? No, we need to simplify, and work with our client, right? In that case, the sale fund, to get it into the shape that we got it into. One thing I will say though, there's a little bit of convenience. So for us, one of the data sets that's like very easy to use to look at racial disparities is the American Community Survey, right? So a lot of the data points, there's different ways. We also use the California Health Interview Survey. Those were the two main data sets that we relied on. It's still a problem. There's so much other data that is not disaggregated by race and ethnicity. So, you could look at spatial concentration types of analyses and kind of show kind of correlationally how that works at an aggregate level, with a kind of correlational analysis. But ideally, you would want to have as much race and ethnicity disaggregated data as possible. And the ACS and the California Health Interview Survey enable us to do that for most of the indicators that we care about.
Yeah, absolutely. Finding the right data is also a challenge sometimes,
Yeah.
especially disaggregated data. So
One
totally.
plug I'll make based on, we put this in the briefing book last year for SCAG, and we've developed it. And, I realized this is something we should put on our website. We called it basically a summary index of racial equity and racial inequity. Right. Often what you'll find is when you have a very racially diverse population with at least 4 or 5 major racial groups and indicators associated with them, it's difficult to know if one region is more is higher or lower on racial equity than another, because you just have a lot of moving parts. You have 5 racial groups and you're trying to, maybe one group has a higher outcome and another group has a worse outcome. And then what does that mean in terms of overall racial equity? So we came up with the summary measure. It's essentially a modified version of the Hoover Index of inequality. And we use that to be able to look across indicators. So for example, what we showed through illustration with the SCAG briefing book last year is, people might want to know, are racial inequities in housing better or worse than racial inequities in educational attainment, or racial inequities in poverty and other kinds of measures? And we were actually able to answer that question. So it turns out in the SCAG region, racial inequities in education are much worse than racial inequities in housing, right? You could have just a mountain of data and not be able to make kind of a simple set of inferences without producing an index like that. So that's another thing, Anita, that I would recommend folks as they think about indicators, is to look at that index of equity, racial equity, and racial inequity that we developed. Actually, you know what? It's not just about racial. What we also do with that measure is that you can compare inequity based on race to inequity based on gender, for example, or whatever other indicator. That's the power of that index. It really doesn't matter what the substantive topic is, nor what the buckets of categories are. And then it provides a summary measure, I would say, especially for the Southern California region, given our complexity and diversity, could be very useful. But it does rely on racially disaggregated data in order for that work to happen.
You're such a wealth of information. Thank you so much for that. And you provided a lot of resources. So, and I know I've been taking some notes, but there's just so much. So I probably will follow up with you on a few things too. But I also want to branch out to others. Are there any other questions that you might have for Karthik or for myself from the presentations?
there was a question in the chat. So let me see if I can find, I saw that website, it says it's under construction. So I'll try to find a link to that People's Dictionary. And also, I'll just open invitation, folks, like you are more than welcome to, would love to have you engaged in this visioning and roadmap process that we're building across issue areas. So feel free to reach out. Gary put his email in the chat. You can just email me. I'll just put my email here in the chat and make sure that it will go to the right person. But let me find that People's Dictionary while we do that.
Yeah.
And I'll just ask, with all the folks in planning here, like, are there other efforts that you can point us to that would be helpful, right, as we do this kind of democratizing work of regional planning?
So in terms of democratizing data, the Price Center for Social Innovation over at USC does a very similar kind of platform for their neighborhood data for social change. I used to work there, so that's how I know, but this is for LA County. So I'm gonna drop the link, but they do very similar, like they do narratives, they do data stories. They just did one for Gateway Cities COG, where I currently work right now. They have a map where you can download the data based on neighborhoods, census tracts, cities, etc. So it's really great work that you're doing, and it's really awesome to see it in your county as well.
Amazing, thank you.
Oh, Fatima, I think just provided the link to the People's Plan Dictionary. So yeah, thank you so much. That's fantastic. And just
I might have found it around the same time as well. Yes.
And
yes.
to respond to Tina's question, yes, the recording of this session will be posted on SCAG's website, specifically our Toolbox Tuesday online training materials. I provide the link there, but we'll also probably be sending out an email after the session to let you know that it's posted. Yep.
I like One House question too, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing that name right.
Yes, that's correct. Thank you.
About how we could do that work with the kind of racial equity lens to it. Yes, go ahead, Manhao. I think you were speaking.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, I was muted. Yeah, I am a data analyst and geospatial analyst with Remy Associates. So I'm really interested in your findings and the research that you mentioned. So thanks for sharing. I'm just interested in to know more, whether your team or the effort with SCAG, how do you leverage spatial, analysis to, is there like any findings interesting, or there's like an effort of incorporating locational, intelligence with this look at racial equity and other issues that you mentioned.
Yeah, good question on how. I mean, this is where I'd say that this is where I think we would benefit from more talent in terms of collaborations. There is the Center for Geospatial Sciences at UCR. We're in early conversations with them. Certainly when it comes to things like exposure to diesel fumes, I mean, it's true not only in parts of LA County, but it's certainly in our region, right? In terms of, you look at the concentrations of poverty and communities of color and their exposure to diesel fumes, right? And the kind of health implications that flow out of that. So I think, but yeah, if you have any, feel free to email me if there are particular methods you would recommend in terms of doing a spatial analysis, beyond, say, using calibrated screen layers or something like that. I think Erin from our team is no longer on the call, but she is, she's our rock star in terms of big data and spatial data analysis. Has a very strong background in environmental analysis, so would love to learn. If you could just email me, and I'm happy to connect with Erin on this.
Yeah,
Great. Thank you so much.
And for SCAG, we do have to do an environmental justice and equity analysis every 4 years. So we do include some spatial analysis, but it's not completely broken down by race. So we do something like that, but that is the goal, right? That we expand our analyses to include not only data crunching, but then also at that spatial aspect of it. So that is more to come from SCAG at least.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, actually, Anita, that's one thing maybe I'll ask you is that, I mean, SCAG does so much. What are ways, especially the work that you're doing in environmental justice and also, you know, in terms of equity, that we can make sure that especially impacted communities, but organizations serving those communities have greater awareness, right, of the kinds of findings and the kind of tools, because that SCAG has a lot of credibility in local government. So anyone else could do something, but if SCAG does something, people can say, hey, like, this is your own analysis, which shows this. How can we increase the impact of the work that your team and others are doing in this regard?
Keep spreading the word, and that's why we have so many working groups. We have these meetings, we have these Toolbox Tuesday sessions. We have a lot of we do a lot of outreach, and we talk to a lot of like the cities and counties to hope that they use our resources and even advertise our resources to other folks, other community members, so that we can get this information out. You know, like the fourth that fourth step that I discussed in my presentation to disseminate and communicate this information. It is sometimes very difficult because as SCAG we are an NPO. We are a little, I would say, definitely more removed to connect with the community members compared to our local jurisdictions, compared to the other different levels of government. So we rely on our relationships with local government to help distribute this information. But I think these working groups, the participants that are here that listen and learn about our resources, I think they are a major driver in helping us spread awareness and spread the research and the information that we have here at SCAG.
Excellent. Well, thank you.
Thank you so much for that question.
No, thank you for the work. No, I just, yeah, one of the things I would say, Nate, and this was not meant as a critique, but if there's a way that, if, you know, your website has so much and there's so much there,
Yes.
if there's maybe, I don't know, maybe you have an equity page where it's like, hey, here are all the resources that you can point to. That way we can then drive people towards that and not get caught in whatever web maze that they get caught in. You know?
Yes, that's true. We actually have an environmental justice webpage. We also have an idea webpage, which houses a lot of our equity resources. And I'll probably be sharing that on in our post session email. But yeah, those are definitely need to be restructured a little bit because it's all over the place. We just have so much information that it can be sometimes unappealing when you're looking at it because there's just so much there. So we definitely need to restructure it a bit. But yeah, we have those web pages that are easily accessible to everyone.
Excellent. We'll be sure to share with
Thank you so
everyone.
much.
Yeah.
All right. So right. So let's wrap up the session. I have a quick few slides to go over before we conclude. But thank you so much, Karthik, for your presentation. It was fantastic, very, very inspirational, and I hope others thought so as well, and that inspire you to do more and take action. But as I mentioned, this is the first of 3 sessions that we will have that will focus on the Equity Resource Guide. Our next session will be in February. The date is still to be determined, but we will focus on engagement and co-powering. And then in April, we will have an integrate and institutionalize session. So please stay tuned and join us in the coming year. So I also wanted to let you know that we do have as I mentioned, we have a lot, SCAG has a lot of working groups, a lot of different meetings. So we have an equity working group that is scheduled for Thursday, December 8th from 1 to 3. And we will focus on broadband access as well as Connect SoCal 2024 and how we're developing that. So if you're interested, please register. And if you have any questions, please contact me. And then lastly, if you have the time, please take this quick 2-minute survey to help us improve on future Toolbox Tuesdays. This is one of the equity Toolbox Tuesdays, but we have so many focused like on housing, on inclusive economic development, and on CEQA. So please let us know if there are any other topic areas that you'd like SCAG to develop any sessions on. So with that, again, I want to thank you everyone for joining us today. Special thank you to Karthik for an amazing presentation and your valuable insight on just a wealth of information that you had. This session is recorded, so for those who missed the beginning or want to come back to revisit some of the resources that we shared throughout the session, please look at SCAG's website for it. We should have the recording available within the next few weeks. So again, thank you so much for joining us today, and we hope you stay safe and healthy, and we'll see you again in February. Thank you, everyone.